My friend Emily, she worked the night audit shift at the Grand Regent Hotel for a couple of years to help pay her way through art school. It was one of those grand old city hotels, the kind with a lot of dark, wood creaky floors and a history that probably included a few scandals and maybe a ghost or two if you believed the older staff members who'd been there for decades. Emily was a pretty level-headed person, not easily spooked by much. But what happened on some of her shifts there? Well, it definitely tested her nerves and her belief in rational explanations. The hotel wasn't always full, especially during the slow off season. There were a few rooms on the top floor, the seventh at the very end of a long, dimly lit, carpeted corridor that were rarely used. The staff had nicknames for them: the Forgotten Rooms, the Quiet Wing. Some of the older housekeepers would whisper stories amongst themselves about strange noises coming from those rooms when they were supposed to be completely empty, or guests who stayed in nearby rooms complaining about feeling uneasy or watched. Management, of course, always dismissed it all as nonsense, just the sounds of an old building settling, or overactive imaginations. One particularly slow Tuesday night, deep in the dead of January, the hotel was practically deserted. Maybe a dozen guests scattered across its 200 rooms. Emily was alone at the massive, echoing front desk, the only sound the ponderous ticking of the grandfather clock and the otherwise silent lobby, and the occasional distant hum of the ancient, rattling elevator. Around 3 a.m., when the city outside was dead quiet, and even the traffic noise had faded, she heard it. A distinct, soft, but very clear knocking sound. It seemed to be coming from the internal monitor that showed the feed from the security camera positioned on the top floor corridor, the one leading to those forgotten rooms. Emily frowned, leaned closer to the monitor. The camera image was flickering slightly. As usual, the colors washed out. The corridor looked empty, deeply shadowed beyond the weak glow of the emergency exit signs. But the knocking came again, unmistakable. It sounded precisely like someone knocking on a heavy wooden door. But which door? All those rooms up there, 710 through 715, were supposed to be vacant, locked, and marked as out of service in her system. Her heart started to beat a little faster. Was it a guest who'd wandered onto the wrong floor, perhaps drunk or disoriented, and was now lost? Or maybe it was a maintenance issue, a loose pipe banging in a rhythmic, deceptive way inside a wall? She called up to the room that seemed to be the source, room 713, one of the ones with the particularly active reputation among the staff, using the internal phone system. No answer, just the continued, intermittent, soft knocking. She then called Marcus, the hotel's elderly, semi-retired night security guard, who mostly spent his shift dozing in a comfortable armchair in a small back office with a cup of lukewarm tea. "Marcus," she whispered into the phone, trying not to sound too alarmed. "I think there's someone on the 7th floor in the quiet wing. I keep hearing knocking from up there near room 713, but it's supposed to be completely empty." Marcus, after a lot of predictable grumbling and sighing about being disturbed, agreed to go up with her. He was a big guy, ex-military, usually unflappable, but even he looked a bit uneasy as they rode the creaky, groaning elevator up to the 7th floor. The corridor was silent now, dimly lit by a few low-wattage, flickering sconces. It felt cold up there, noticeably colder than the rest of the hotel, a damp chill that seemed to seep into their bones. They walked slowly, their footsteps muffled by the threadbare carpet towards room 713. As they approached, the knocking started again, soft but insistent, definitely coming from inside room 713, or from its door. Tap dash tap dash tap. Pause. Tap tap tap. Marcus rapped sharply on the door with his knuckles. Security? Anyone in there? Open up. Silence. The knocking stopped instantly. He tried the handle. Locked as it should be. He used his master key. The door creaked open with a protesting groan into a pitch-black room. Marcus shone his powerful flashlight around. The room was empty. Thick dust sheets covered the old-fashioned furniture. The air was stale, cold, and smelled faintly of disuse. There was no sign anyone had been in there for months, maybe years. But as Emily stood in the doorway, peering in over Marcus's shoulder, she got an overwhelming, visceral feeling that someone had been there just moments before, that they had just vanished into thin air. And there was a faint, strange, Swedish, cloying smell in the air, like old, dried perfume, or perhaps decaying flowers, a smell she hadn't noticed in the corridor, outside. See? Nothing here, Marcus said, though his voice was a little less confident now, a little too loud in the stillness. Probably just the old pipes banging, like I told ya. Old buildings, they talked to themselves at night. He seemed particularly eager to leave the room, backing out quickly. But Emily wasn't so sure. The knocking had been too deliberate, too rhythmic, too much like a human hand. And that smell, it was unsettling. They locked up room 713 securely and went back downstairs. For the rest of her shift, Emily kept glancing nervously at the monitor for the 7th floor, half expecting to see something or hear that soft, insistent knocking again. It didn't return that night. When she told her day shift colleagues about it, they mostly rolled their eyes, though some of the older ones exchanged knowing glances. "Oh, that's just the Grand Regent for you," one of the more seasoned receptionists said with a smirk. "Place is probably haunted. Don't worry about it, honey. You'll get used to it." Another suggested it was probably kids from a nearby occupied room playing a prank, sneaking around. But there were no nearby occupied rooms that night, not on that whole wing. The knocking incidents near room 713, and sometimes other vacant rooms in that wing happened a few more times over the next few months, always late at night, always when the hotel was quiet, and almost always when Emily was on shift alone at the desk. She never saw anyone. The camera feed was always inconclusive, often glitching out at the crucial moments. But that feeling of a recent, unseen presence, that strange, sweet, cloying smell was sometimes there, a silent testament to something inexplicable. Was it a ghost, as the old-timers and their stories believed? Or was there a more human and perhaps more disturbing explanation? Could someone, maybe another staff member with a master key, or even an outsider who had found a way to bypass the aging security systems, be using that vacant room or others like it for some secret, illicit purpose? A clandestine meeting place? A spot to hide something or someone? The knocking could have been a signal misinterpreted by Emily as coming from an empty room. The sweet smell could have been anything from drugs to cleaning chemicals used to erase traces of their presence. The faulty, unreliable camera in that specific corridor was certainly convenient for anyone wanting to remain unseen. The offense, if there was one, was the unauthorized, secret use of hotel property, and the profound psychological stress and fear it placed on the night staff, particularly Emily. Emily never solved the mystery of the knocking on room 713. She eventually quit her job at the Grand Regent, partly because the late shifts were brutal on her art school schedule, but also because the place just gave her the creeps too often, made her feel constantly on edge. She told me she's convinced someone, a living person, was using that room, someone who knew how to remain invisible, how to play on the building's reputation, and the thought of who it might have been and what they might have been doing just a few floors above her while she sat alone at the massive front desk in the dead of night. That's a thought that still makes her shiver. It's a reminder that even in a grand old hotel full of history, there can be hidden occupants. And not all of them pay for their rooms or even want to be found. And sometimes the oldest stories have a kernel of very real, very human truth to them. I used to drive the late night bus route, the number 12, a couple of years back. City called it the Owl Service, but us drivers just called it the Ghost Run. It snaked through some of the older, quieter parts of town, then out towards the industrial parks and the sparsely populated suburbs. After midnight, especially on weeknights, you'd be lucky to get more than a handful of passengers. Mostly shift workers, hospital staff, folks coming home late from who knows where. It was a lonely job, just me and the hum of the engine and the endless dark streets. You hear stories, of course, from other drivers. Tales about phantom fares or the lady in white who supposedly haunts the old cemetery stop. Most of it's just talk to pass the time, to spook the new guys. I never put much stock in it, until that one night. It was a Tuesday or maybe a Wednesday around 2:30 a.m., raining lightly, that fine. Misty rain that makes the streetlights blur and the road slick. I was on my last loop, heading outbound. The bus was empty except for me. I pulled up to the stop by the old, disused textile mill, a place that always gave me the creeps, all broken windows and shadows. The shelter there was just a rusty pole with a sign. As I slowed, I saw a figure step out from the deep shadows of the mill's loading dock. Just one person, huddled in a dark, hooded coat, face completely obscured by the hood and the gloom. They flagged me down, paid their fare and exact change without a word, the coin cold and damp in my hand, and shuffled to the very back of the bus, taking a seat in the darkest corner. I didn't get a good look at their face, or even if it was a man or a woman, just an impression of stillness, and a faint, musty smell like old, damp earth. I shrugged it off, seen weirder passengers on the night run. I continued on my route, stop after stop. No one else got on, no one got off. I'd call out the stops, glance in the big rearview mirror. My passenger in the back remained completely still, a dark, unmoving shape. The rain pattered against the windows. The only other sound was the rhythmic swish of the wipers. We reached the end of the line, the turnaround point out by the new, mostly empty industrial estate. This was it. Last stop. End of the line, folks. I called out, a bit louder than necessary, as I always did when I thought someone might have fallen asleep. This bus is going out of service. I waited. No movement from the back. Hello, last stop? I called again, starting to feel a little annoyed. I switched on the interior lights fully. The bus was suddenly bright, almost sterile. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stood up, turning to face the back. The seat was empty. My heart did a little lurch. The passenger was gone. But how? I hadn't stopped anywhere except the designated stops. The doors had only opened at those stops, and I would have seen someone get off. I always check. The windows in the back were sealed shut, the emergency exits untouched. There was no way out except past me. I walked slowly down the aisle, my footsteps echoing in the sudden, vast emptiness of the bus. I checked under the seats. Nothing. I checked the little luggage rack. Empty. The faint, musty smell was still there, though. Stronger now in the back. It was as if they just evaporated. I'm not a superstitious guy, like I said, but this was unsettling. Deeply unsettling. I did a full sweep of the bus, even opened the emergency hatch on the roof, just in case. Nothing. No sign of anyone. I drove the empty bus back to the depot, my mind racing. Had I imagined them? Was I so tired I'd hallucinated a passenger? But I remembered the cold, damp coins in my hand. I remembered the dark shape in my mirror. When I got to the depot, I mentioned it to old Frank, the night dispatcher, a guy who'd seen it all. I tried to sound casual. Hey, Frank, ever have a passenger just disappear on you? Frank looked up from his racing form, a knowing glint in his tired eyes. Ah, the number 12, yeah, near the old mill stop. I nodded, surprised he pinpointed it. Yeah, he said, lowering his voice. Happens sometimes on my run. We call them the silent riders. They get on, they pay, they sit in the back, and then they're just gone by the end of the line. No fuss, no muss. But how? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Frank just shrugged. Beats me, kid. Some say it is folks who don't to be seen getting off at a particular place, so they slip out when you're not looking. Maybe when you stop at a red light in a quiet spot. Others say it's just one of the features of their all service. The old mill has a lot of stories, Not all of them nice. He winked, then went back to his paper. I kept driving that night bus for another 6 months after that whole thing, and let me tell you, that stop by the old mill, it became a place I dreaded, a knot in my stomach every time I approached it. I found myself compulsively checking my mirrors, my eyes darting to that back corner seat whenever I picked up a late night fare, especially if they were quiet or kept their face hidden. But I never saw that specific hooded figure again, never got that same earthy, damp smell. Still, something changed in me after that night. I never, ever felt truly alone on those late night runs anymore. There was always this little prickle of unease, this awareness that the thin veil between the normal and the not normal was a lot thinner than I like to think. Because sometimes, man, the scariest passengers, the ones that really get under your skin, are the ones who leave no trace at all, except for that cold, lingering feeling in your gut and a story that makes other people look at you like you crazy. But and maybe a few other old drivers on that route know that it was real in some deeply unsettling and unexplainable way. My cousin, Sarah, landed a part-time job a while back working the closing shift at the old Carnegie Library downtown. It's a beautiful building, one of those classic stone structures with high ceilings, echoing halls and endless shadowy stacks of books. Her shift usually ended around 9 p.m., and part of her job was to do a final walkthrough, make sure all the patrons had left. Lights were off in the non-public areas. And the back doors were secured before the main security guard did his final lockup. Most of the time, it was a quiet, peaceful end to the day. But then she started noticing things that weren't so peaceful. It began in the history section, way in the back on the 3rd floor, an area that was usually deserted even during peak hours. Sarah would be doing her rounds, the only sound her own footsteps on the polished wood floors. And she'd find a book, sometimes 2, pulled from a shelf and left open on one of the heavy oak reading tables. Not just left, but left open to a specific author or other. Grim page, accounts of old city scandals, unsolved disappearances from a century ago, or local folklore, about tragedies that had supposedly occurred near where the library now stood. The first few times, she figured it was just a forgetful patron who'd rushed out at closing. She'd reshelve the books and think nothing more of it. But it kept happening, always in that same section, always those kinds of unsettling historical accounts. And then she started noticing other things. A chair pulled out from a table, angled as if someone had just been sitting there, even though she was certain she'd pushed it in earlier. The faint, almost imperceptible scent of old pipe tobacco in the air. A smell that definitely didn't belong in a library, especially one that had been smoke-free for decades. And sometimes a soft creak from the floorboards above. In the attic space that was supposedly sealed off and used only for storing very old, rarely accessed archives. Sarah mentioned it to Mr. Abernathy, the head librarian, a kindly elderly man who had worked there his entire life. "Mr. Abernathy," she said one evening, "I keep finding books left out in the third floor history stacks after we close, and sometimes I hear noises from the attic. Is it possible someone is staying in the building after hours?" Mr. Abernathy just chuckled, a dry, papery sound. "Oh, my dear Sarah, that's just the library settling. She's an old building, full of drafts and creaks. And patrons are always leaving books about. As for the attic, it's been locked for years. Probably just squirrels or pigeons gotten up there." He clearly didn't take her concerns seriously. But Sarah knew it wasn't just settling. The open books, always on those specific dark topics, felt too deliberate. The scent of pipe tobacco was too distinct. And the feeling of not being alone, that prickling sensation on her skin when she was in that back corner of the third floor, it was too strong. The library had its own quiet tales, of course. About a former librarian from the early 1900s who was obsessed with local tragedies and supposedly died in his office. Sarah had always dismissed them. The offense, if there was one, was trespassing at the very least, but it felt like more. Who would hide in a library after closing just to read old, morbid books? And how were they getting in and out without being detected by the main security? One night, Sarah was doing her final sweep. She deliberately left the history section for last, a knot of dread in her stomach. As she approached, she heard it, a soft, rhythmic rustling sound, like pages being turned, very slowly, very deliberately, and that faint, unmistakable scent of pipe tobacco. Her heart hammered. Someone was in there. She peeked cautiously around the end of a tall bookshelf, and she saw him. An old man, very thin, dressed in slightly old-fashioned, dark clothing, sitting at one of the reading tables, a large, leather-bound book opened in front of him. His back was to her. He seemed completely absorbed in his reading, one gnarled hand slowly tracing the lines of text. He hadn't heard her approach. Sarah didn't know what to do. Confront him? Call security? He didn't look particularly threatening, just out of place, like a figure from one of the old photographs in the library's local history exhibit. As she hesitated, he slowly closed the book, stood up, and, without looking around, walked silently towards a section of shelving at the very back of the room. A section that, as far as Sarah knew, was just a solid wall of old, rarely disturbed books, and then he just wasn't there anymore. He didn't open a door, didn't duck behind a shelf. He just seemed to melt into the shadows between the towering bookcases. Sarah stood there, frozen, for a long moment. Then she forced herself to walk over to where he'd been. The book he'd been reading was still on the table. It was an old, crumbling volume about unsolved local mysteries from the 19th century. The chair was pulled out, and the air was thick with the scent of pipe tobacco. She checked the shelves where he disappeared. Solid wood, tacked tight with ancient books. No hidden doors, no secret passages that she could see. She ran downstairs and told the night guard, a young guy named Mike, what she'd seen. Mike was skeptical, but agreed to go up with her. When they got to the history section, the book was gone from the table. The chair was pushed in. The scent of tobacco had faded. There was no sign anyone had been there. Mike looked at her like she was crazy. "You sure you weren't just tired, Sarah? Seeing things?" Sarah knew what she'd seen, but she had no proof. When she told Mr. Abernathy the next day, He just smiled sadly. Ah, yes. Sounds like our old friend Mr. Silas has been paying a visit. He was our head librarian many years ago. Obsessed with the city's darker history. They say he never truly left. He said it as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Was Mr. Silas a ghost, as Mr. Abernathy implied? Or was there a more earthly explanation? Could someone, perhaps a homeless person with a scholarly bent, or a very dedicated local historian with a secret way in, be using the library after hours as their private reading room? Someone who knew the building's old secrets, its forgotten passages, its weak spots in security. The pipe tobacco could be a deliberate affectation, or just their habit. The focus on dark local history could be their genuine interest, or a way to unnerve anyone who stumbled upon them. Sarah never got a definitive answer. She continued to work the closing shift, but she always did her walkthrough of the third floor history section with a pounding heart, half expecting to see that quiet old man again or find another book left open to a chilling page. The mystery of the after-hours patron remained. It made her realize that some old buildings don't give up their secrets easily, and that sometimes the quietest places hold the most unsettling presences, whether they're of this world or not. And the most unnerving part for Sarah was never knowing for sure if she was dealing with a harmless eccentric, a clever trespasser, or something far stranger that defied easy explanation. Something that only the oldest books in that library might understand.